Oh, okay. Wow. Welcome, everybody in the Mining for Vervaeke podcast. And today, I welcome guests from Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord server. As always, we have Valerie and Gilad, Peter, and Kevin. Hi, everybody. The subject for today is problem formulation and ill-defined problems as well. We will catch on that, proposed by Valeria last week. And so I prepared a little couple sentences intro that I found on Bing. So John Vervaeke defines problem formulation as what's actually missing in an ill-defined problem is how to formulate the problem, how to zero in on the relevant information and constrain the problem so that you can solve it. Well, that's pretty clear and broad at the same time. And I hope I will understand it a little bit more, and you guys as well. And I asked people in the room to prepare a couple sentences about the subject as a form of check-in. So I would like Peter to start.
Hey guys, problem formulation is a it's a really in-depth topic that Vervaeke talks about, and one of the central things that he brings up is this concept of combinatorial explosion, about how the proliferation of events it increases factorially as the amount of constraints and inputs and outputs all come together to form all these different kinds of combinations. And so something like a game of chess has something like, I have it written down, it's 4.29 times 10 to the 88th possible chess games, which is more than the number of atoms in the universe. And so we can't just use logic alone to solve these problems that are combinatorially explosive. We have to rely on something else, something like heuristics, and that's the process of zeroing in on the relevant information and constraining the search space so that we don't have to search through the whole search space.
Thank you. Gilad?
So most of the time when we think about problems and how to solve problems, we think about well-defined problems. I know what my starting state is, I know what I'm allowed to do, and I want to optimize to get some sort of solution because I know what my goal is. Most of the time, none of that is true. I don't have enough information to clearly define what my initial state is. I don't know what I have access to, like what I can move, change or not move, and definitely not what's relevant and could actually change something to move. And I might not know exactly what the goal state is. So when we approach most situations in life, they're what John calls ill-defined problems. And then the process that we need to do in order to have any sort of way to improve or to push ourselves towards some goal is to formulate the problem. What is it that the situation is? What does it afford? And what do we want to get out of it? So yeah, that's the basis of what problem formulation is about.
Thank you. Kevin?
So I guess maybe something that might be helpful is another example of like a well-defined problem, which I think Vervaeke is prone to use, which is like multiplication, right? Like, well, I know like I need to use numbers. I know that there's a certain kind of process, an algorithm I can kind of follow, right, to get to the end state. I know the output shouldn't have to be like a bunny or a color or like, it has to be a number, right? That's like part of my understanding of it being a well-defined problem. And I want to use that example because I think another point that's maybe helpful to point at this point is like the things that we turn into well-defined problems at first are actually ill-defined problems. So if you're teaching someone multiplication for the first time and they don't know how that process works, it's actually ill-defined. Like they won't know what to do. And for people, this might be more relatable. Like, you know, once you go into like algebra, mathematics, or calculus, you know, that becomes a space where like they eventually, if you know the space well enough, they do become well-defined problems for you. You do know what to do. But, you know, there is some like learning period of like transforming that ill-defined problem into a well-defined problem. And I'm not sure what the term is that Vervaeke would like to use for that process, but I think that's part of this, like, you know, part of getting better at problem formulation is knowing how to translate between these two classes of problems. Yeah, so I'll tag up there.
Thank you. And Valeria.
Yeah, I think that the term comes from some AI or some cognitive science. It's not John's. I tried to look at the paper.
Newell and Simon.
Thank you. And it's a way of formalizing problem solving, because we are like, as cognitive agents, how do we solve problems? Oh, we are in a certain state. I need a glass of water. I have these operations that are possible to me. I can grab the cup of water, I can move my hand, I can do a little dance, and I have an end state, which is I have drunken the water. So it's a way of formalizing it. And as Gilad and Kevin and Peter said, that most of the problems are not. So in order to define the end state and the beginning state, they already require a lot of relevance realization. And because they require a lot of relevance realization, and also the operations in between, the things that you can do, they multiply as you how do you know what are the relevant things even to consider? So that's why did I suggest that? One of the things that come to my mind is that I do some life coaching every once in a while, right? And then people come with a problem and I kind of help them get a grip of the problem. And one thing that can happen, for example, is that somebody comes and they say like, my problem is that I cannot choose which university I want to go to. And then I try to understand what's going on. And in the end, we find out that actually they don't want to go to any university. They just never considered that they don't want to go to the university, because they were formulating the problem as like, which university do I want to choose? When actually the formulation of the problem was already wrong. The problem should be, do I even want to go to the university? So that is when the way you formulate your problems might make it possible for you to solve it or not. And the framing of the problem might make a solution possible or not. So that's why I thought it would be interesting for us to talk about it.
Thank you so much. Okay, and now I would invite a little bit of discussion into this room. And guys, would you like to address each other's points of view?
One thing, when you were talking, Valeria, I like the linguistic thing when you say that this guy's formulation of the problem, which was which university I want to choose, rather than which university I want to attend, right? Because sometimes like that is actually what they're dealing with, like as if this is about sort of the abstract process of making a choice now,
Yeah.
rather than having to live through that choice that has been made, and like what do you actually aim for the next coming years, like for your life.
Yeah, but that was her problem. She couldn't choose. She did not know how to choose. She didn't think about which university she wanted to attend because her problem was the choosing. So yeah, good catch.
I think that goes right to the heart of problem formulation, because one of the issues, or one of the reasons why problem formulation is brought up and brought up powerfully is when we have formulated the problem in a way that's counterproductive, are, just ill formulated, let's say, then it can make us stuck in a very profound way. And the example that John gives of this is the problem where you have a chessboard that you need to tile with domino tiles. And then you ask, well, can you do that? And if so, show how, and if not, prove that you can't. And it's very easy. You can just like put them in rows or wherever you want to do that, and then you get the domino tiles to tile all of the chessboard. And then if you remove two white blocks from two ends of the chessboard, and you ask that again, then you can see very, very highly intelligent people spend huge amounts of time trying to, yes, those are the two removed white pieces,
Yeah,
exactly.
Same thing, yeah.
Yeah, and you can spend huge amounts of time like trying to figure out all of the combinations of ways you could put domino tiles in this way, which is one formulation, right? That this is a combinatorial problem or like a tiling problem, some sort of way to exhaust the search space rather than reformulating the problem and looking at it, as John says, as a parity problem. Like now there are two fewer white squares than black squares, and every domino tile had to go on one white and one black. So you can't do it. That's just very simple answer that doesn't take a lot of time. And I think that's why it comes up because the difference that could come about from reformulating the problem in terms of getting to some goal can be dramatic, as dramatic as from an infinite time to solve to seconds.
I like how you said that, because some, as you said, the smart people that know a lot of mathematics, they might get caught in what they know. And that is like something that it's really insightful to think that, that in a way, that's the story that if you have a hammer, you'll see all problems as nails. So what are the hammers that we have that it's keeping us from seeing problems that are not nails and looking for other tools or approaching them in a different way?
And I guess as like a comment on the tiling problem, actually I paused the video because I have a background in mathematics. So like I paused the video at that point. I was like, oh, let me see if we can figure this out. And I did exactly what he said, funny enough, of like trying to figure out, like, I was trying to go case by case of like, okay, so what if I just like do a case where they're all horizontal and it was just like, there's so many different cases. I was like, how am I ever supposed to figure this out? I was like, there's just too many of them. And I'm not even sure if I'm covering all the possible like spaces of options. And then eventually, once you present a solution, this actually happens a lot in mathematics too, where like I remember one professor I knew in university, he'd forgotten a way to solve a certain kind of problem, and because he forgot that approach, he actually came up with a new approach that was actually like publishable, and he had done some research for some kids, actually kind of somewhat related problem, which I won't go into, but yeah, so it's interesting because sometimes the benefit of forgetting a certain approach is helpful for discovering a new one that might be more insightful or might be more effective. Because and for people, the parity thing, what that's referencing, the parity is between the black and the white tiles, and Gilad kind of reference this, is that like anytime you place a domino, no matter which way you place it, vertically or horizontally, it has to cover a black and white square. So there has to be, so from this perspective, there has to be, the same number of black squares as there are white squares. So that's all you really need for this to be like tileable, in essence. And if you can see that pattern, then you realize even you just take away one square, right? If I take away like a one white square, that still breaks it because I still need one black and one white square for any given domino. So I need an even number of those, or at least like, yeah, those need to be an even number at the end of the day. And so that's a completely different shift from like the thing I was saying, where it's like, well, what are all the different ways I can rearrange this, and how do I think about this? That's way more messy than this much cleaner approach, which is just a different way of thinking about it. And even mathematics, that's oftentimes what is a helpful solution, is like you just reach into a different domain or a different like framing of the problem of like, I'm thinking about this combinatorially, but what if I think about this algebraically? What if I think about this topologically? Or from the perspective of like analysis, which, those are just different frames of reference for different kinds of problems, or geometrically or whatever. Yeah, so tag out. Thank you.
Peter?
Yeah, this is probably one of the ones that I know the least about regarding Vervaeke's stuff. So this is very much a learning experience for me, and I have my notes open right now that I took from Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, and I'm constantly going over them. But yeah, I do recall the mutilated chessboard problem that Gilad was talking about. And there's this peculiar thing with insight where you could just point out something. I mean, it's just like the 9-dot problem, where you could just point out one little fact and then everything reorganizes itself around that and the solution becomes obvious. But before that, you get lost in this complexity. And I remember Vervaeke talked about how this one mathematician was just filling up notebooks and notebooks of trying to figure out the actual solution to the mutilated chessboard problem and was just trying to brute force it. But once I mean, I don't remember the exact insight for it, but I think it was you had to remove the corner pieces, and then that gave you some kind of insight as to how to solve it. I don't remember how exactly, but I think you addressed on that, the parity strategy. But yeah, one of the things I was really interested in was the free lunch theorem, or the no free lunch theorem. The idea that you can't have a perfect way of solving an ill-defined problem. You can only have certainty once the problem becomes well-defined, and then you use deductive logic. But until you can get to that step, it's there's no perfect way to solve it. So that's something that I'm interested in.
I have prepared a clip which talks about problem formulation or problem framing in respects to insight and intelligence. So, hold on. Yes, I'm trying to make it as best as possible. There. Let's see. A little bit lag. There.
But here's a proposal, right? I think it's a proposal that sort of is clearly, right, presented to us from a lot of the arguments we've already considered, right? We do have a normativity on construal. We have standards of what a good problem formulation is versus a bad problem formulation. Where do we study that normativity in psychology? Well, we study it in insight problem solving. We know, right, what a bad problem formulation is. A bad problem formulation is one that puts you into a combinatorially explosive search space. A bad problem formulation is one that does not turn your ill-defined problem into a well-defined problem. A bad problem formulation is one in which you are not paying careful attention to how salience is misleading you. So that's telling us something really interesting, right? That there is, in addition to inference being crucial to being rational, insight is crucial to being rational too, because if what we mean by insight is somebody who is good at formulating problems, avoiding combinatorial explosion, avoiding ill-definedness, avoiding salience misdirection, right? Then being insightful is going to be central to being rational. It's not going to be something that comes up out of the irrational aspects of the psyche. It comes in from the non-inferential. But why should we be identifying, nobody is here, identifying rationality with just a pure logical normativity on inference?
Okay. So problem formulation, proper problem formulation that is like connected to insight. I completely lack words to, like, I can't repeat that, what he just said. Kind of feels like I understand it, I sense it, but I can't repeat it. So guys, I give you the microphone.
I guess I have a question to the group about, because if hopefully I took the right kind of notes about what he's saying, because if I got him right, he was saying the bad problem formulation puts you into control search space, a bunch of stuff to search through. It doesn't move ill-defined to well-defined problems into the well-defined problem category, and it also doesn't make you pay attention to like what's salient. It doesn't like make you be aware of that process. So is it implied that the good problem formulation does the opposite of all those things? It's like it takes me out of the control search space, that it does in fact help me put ill-defined to well-defined problems, and also it makes me aware of what I'm paying attention to as being relevant to the problem. Like, is that kind of implied by this, or do y'all feel like there's something more to a good problem formulation than that?
I think he refers specifically to insight as crucial for good problem formulation, but that's kind of kicking the can down the road, because now I need to say what insight is.
Yeah, I think that the if you pay attention, the killer thing in that clip is that there is no formula for being rational. Oh, and the rationalists now die, because it's like, if rationality is insight, like rationality is the aha, that's what he's saying. That rationality depends on the aha. That's the killer thing.
I think further than that, he's saying like that you have the reduction of rationality to inference, to just logical inference, is inconsistent by the token of logical inference, right? So if you try to put it to its own standard, it fails at its own test.
Maybe something that I feel like should be added here is that the just because there's no formula, I mean, I guess to be like maybe more precise about that, it's like I think the sense is that there's no like specific set of steps that will guarantee you, right, kind of like this kind of process insight. But and I think Vervaeke is to this perspective, it does seem like there are certain things you can do to kind of facilitate that kind of moment in insight. And I actually remember when I was studying mathematics in university, I had taken this, I think, class on Coursera. I think it was on like, it was like how to learn or something like that. And one of the heuristics, or one of the rules of thumb I got from that course, which is a free course, you can go take it, and was the focus and diffuse mode of I guess learning. And it actually kind of ties into this, like the focus mode is like where you're like drilling down and like you're kind of narrowing in a problem. And diffuse mode is like, you can kind of think of it as like the default mode network, where you're kind of mind wandering, you're kind of free associating. And part of the suggestion was that like if you ever get stuck in a problem, and I came across as another sources too for like my medical educational stuff, which applies to like really anything that you're learning. If you ever get stuck, it's like very helpful to actually just go take a break. And I don't mean like take a break to go like play on social media. I mean like just go like walk around and don't do anything like actively. And I would do this quite often. Like I'd be trying to do a proof for a theorem or something, and I would get stuck, and I'd just be like, okay, I'm just gonna go to the bathroom, and like, or I'll just go like to this coffee shop and look at this like, piece of art on the wall while just kind of whatever. And very oftentimes like that would just kind of help. Or I would take a nap. That's another thing. I would take a nap for like 15, 20 minutes, and then I wake up and I was like, oh look, I feel like I've made progress, even though I wasn't actively doing something. I wasn't focusing on like a certain path to the solution. I was just like kind of loosening the grip of my previous approach. And that would help kind of quite consistently enough, where I was like, well, there's something to this. I'm going to keep doing this, and knowing that I think was a big advantage. But it wasn't guaranteed, right? It didn't always work, and I think that's a key component. Like there do seem to be general principles that help us develop these moments of insight, whatever problem we're working on. And also seems to be a necessary component that we need to like actually do, like we need to spend a lot of time actually trying to solve it first. And then you put it on the back burner, let your mind wander. And then like that gives it a chance to kind of like, I guess, somehow percolate through our, subconscious or something. But anyway, tag out.
Yeah, you have to. So when you are trying to solve the problem, it's almost like you're priming your mind, you're making it relevant. You're making the aspects of the thing that you want your background processing to focus on, you're making them relevant. So if I post anything, I can alter my attention, my relevance realization machinery by constantly putting my attention on something on purpose. That's how we meditate. We put the attention on the breath until it becomes relevant enough to stay there. So you're trying to solve the problem, you're kind of putting your attention to it, putting your attention to it, putting your attention to it. And then you go do something else, but something in your mind is still like thinking about it and making associations out of your consciousness that might think outside the box somehow.
Yeah. Interesting about relevance realization and problem formulation. So I understand that there is something we care about and we find it really important. We pick up the information that is salient to us. And we also, when we formulate a problem, we formulate it based on the things we find relevant on this kind of limited lens through which we perceive the world. We don't know everything. That's why it's really difficult to formulate a problem, because like we would have to take into account everything. So so we formulate the problem based on the things we find important or like that stand out to us. So that relevance realization and problem formulation. I do think what are the ways maybe of improving that, knowing our limitations, like how can we formulate better, how can we formulate the problems better, knowing that we are have this limited framing. Hopefully that question made sense.
Well, I guess I have a kind of a related question to this, which I like to often bring into these Vervaeke-oriented discussions. Is like, what is the utility of this language? Like, what does knowing this concept going to do for people, like on a day-to-day basis? How is this actually useful in people's practical, everyday lives? Which, I think that's actually kind of related to what Kara was just asking about, like, well, how does knowing what's relevant to us, like, does that help us in some way, like be better problem solvers? So I guess I'd like to also kind of add that question of like, what is it this is going to do for someone to like learn about this kind of language and framing of things? Yeah, so tag up. I
think Valeria's example is a great one for that, right? You have the most powerful thing about realizing that problem formulation is very likely the most important part of how to solve a problem in terms of how hard it's going to be. That can really be dramatic in changing your approach to those things, because usually I think you're going to find yourself, when you're stuck, when you have a problem, let's say it's a problem in a relationship or something that's kind of more daily lives are very common, like to everyone, right? You have some problem in a relationship and you feel like it's a dead-end street, right? You feel like there's nothing you can do that makes any sense. or that, you know, for whatever reason, the sense is a sense of being stuck, right? Then I think the idea of realizing, okay, even though this is a problem and I can point to that it's a problem, that doesn't mean that I formed it correctly. And maybe I can find a way to form it in such a way that would be incredibly different and maybe much easier to address it.
Do you have like a concrete example of that from your own experience in your life where like that happened, where you're like, man, this is like such a big, man, whatever this, you know, this relational issue. And then like, you're like, oh, wait a second, if I just think about it this way, boom, it like dissolves, or it's like much easier to handle.
I have something that not a specific thing, but a general thing that I sometimes offer people, and that is, I'm feeling really bad because I'm really anxious because I'm afraid of losing my job, and that the problem is like, how do I not lose my job? And it's like, no. There are 3 different problems that we can formulate here. One is your anxiety. You don't know if you're going to lose your job or not. So let's deal with the anxiety and then see more clearly if your job is in danger or not. The second is, what are the consequences of you losing your job? Because sometimes the person, the good thing, that it's a good thing in disguise for them to lose their job. So what exactly are you afraid of if you end up losing your job anyway? If there are things that you can do if you lose your job. And then there's the problem of, how can I not lose my job? So knowing that when you see a problem, that it's not necessarily a given of the world. The problem that you see is some interpretation between you and the world. And you can see it differently, and you can change your relationship with it and open up new possibilities.
I can give one example, specific example to your question. It's not from me, but from a friend. So he was talking about this girl he had met. He got her phone number, and he kind of wanted to go out on a date with her, but he was talking with me, and he's saying like, yeah, but I don't feel like all of this WhatsApp chatting, you know, and all of this kind of tedium of going through that. And my advice to him at that time was like, okay, like if you don't want to do it, just like ask her out, just like write to her, hey, you want to go out tomorrow? Something like maybe that'd work. And he said, yeah, but it won't work. But like your options are you gonna just throw the opportunity away, or are you gonna play it the way you feel like playing it, and maybe you'll get something out of it? And that's the kind of reframing, instead of like, I'm trying to like play the game right, to like, how can I enjoy this, and kind of, I don't know exactly like to phrase the change of the framing, but that change of framing, I got him to be a bit like significantly less tortured by this opposition and just do something about it. So.
Change of
Go ahead, Kara.
So I will address very quickly. A change of framing and formulating the problem and the solution. I was listening to John's episode, I think it was in 43, where he talked about people finding insight, and there were 3 groups, and people were thinking deeply on a problem on their own, or people were thinking with their significant other together on a problem, or they would internalize and have internal conversation with their significant other. And so like the 2 groups that kind of reframe the problem through the eyes of the significant other, and significant other is here because like they know what they would say, let's say, and how to present the problem, right? Led to much better results than when the person was sitting there in their own, through their own usual framing. So we can't see our own frame. We can't look at it. We look through it. That's the thing. Circling back to 9-dot problem.
But if I remember right, wasn't it also true that the people who were like trying to model the other person's perspective on the situation, didn't they also have more success in solving the problem? Or am I misremembering that?
They did.
They
Yeah, they
did.
did. The
That's
third
what I
person
said.
perspective helps with the insight.
Yeah, how do you say Solomon approach?
Effect, yeah.
Solomon effect. Yeah.
Decentering. I want to address, if I may, beams of destruction said on the chat that talked about fear of the unknown in relation to the fear of losing your job. And I was thinking, why are we afraid of the unknown? Because in an unknown situation, everything is more undefined, right? There is this combinatorial explosion there of all the possibilities of the thing. When I know how to deal with things. When I am in an unknown situation, there are all these new things that open up that I don't know how to deal with, that I don't know what they mean, that I don't know what is relevant. So the world becomes more combinatorially explosive when I am in an unknown situation. That might be a reason for us to be afraid. I don't know. What do you guys think of that?
So I guess just because I'm not looking at the YouTube, I guess, stream stuff, what is the comment, I guess, that you respond to, just for context?
He just mentioned fear of the unknown.
Okay, gotcha. And you're just kind of extrapolating
Yeah,
how that might be related to this kind of thing.
I don't have the technical capacity to display the comment on the screen. I don't know how to do it on Zoom. I think it's a Restream and StreamYard option. I will switch to StreamYard in the future, probably. Yeah. And we haven't heard from Peter in a while. Oh, yeah, Gila.
Yeah, I wanted to add about problem formulation. Just from my own experience, it's something that I've found to be very, very present and pretty much the most in the most mind-blowing way in physics. So when studying physics, I come across a lot of things where you kind of figure out the basic rules of some system and you know a lot of things about it, and then it becomes too complicated and too complex to solve. And then what do you see the progress is being made through is not someone really grinding down and solving huge amounts of equations or something, but rather someone reformulating the problem and looking at the same physical system through something else, through some other frame, I mean. And then like the most amazing things and the most amazing discoveries are made. And this is the case with superconductivity. So a superconducting material has 10 to the 23 or scale of 10 to the 23 molecules or atoms in it, and it's literally impossible to solve 10 to the 23 what's it called, like internally dependent equations. There's a name for that. In any case, like you can't solve it, and yet by not solving it and looking at something that is actually false about the system, you can see clearly that it's not representing what we know to be true about the system, but close enough for representing superconductivity. You get to something called Cooper pairs, and that kind of goes to explain that. And so, I don't know, for me, it was quite striking how that problem, when I was thinking about a problem that would literally take longer than the age of the universe to solve. And yet we solve it by not even trying. That was, I think, the most stark example of how important problem formulation is. So it means you're asking about Feynman diagrams. This isn't about Feynman diagrams specifically. It's just interdependent differential equations of 10 to the 23 of them. So yeah.
I was responding yep to the previous thing you posted. not to the thing Gilad is referring to. Yeah.
So yeah, just wanting to build on what Gilad said. It can really help if you go to another domain or another perspective to get a crucial insight to the problem that you're trying to solve. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, but there's a scene where the wise old mentor, Uncle Iroh, draws in the sand the symbol of all the 4 elements, and they're from the Fire Nation. They're from one particular domain, and he said that by studying all the other domains as well, you can learn these connections and get these insight. And that's when he teaches his nephew this move that he learned from a different domain from the one that he was usually in. And so you can build upon other ways of thinking, and by trying to understand other people's perspectives and learning from other domains, you can get I think Vervaeke calls it a synoptic integration. And a lot of our science right now is really fragmented, especially psychology. And so if we can figure out how to bridge between these things, we can get something that is more comprehensive, more holistic, and more coherent overall. And then going back to the idea of the fear of the unknown, I think from a technical perspective, I don't think we can actually truly fear the unknown, because for you to fear something, something has to be within your scope. And so I don't think we technically fear the unknown. We fear what we might know or what we might come in contact with that we don't have a clear picture of. And so I would say we don't really know. We don't know what we don't know, but we can fear how, when we come in contact with what we don't know, can change what we do know, or have some kind of effect on us that's really bad. And in a lot of ways, this conversation echoes back to the conversation we had about reciprocal narrowing, and this also connects with reciprocal narrowing, which is that when you encounter the world in a bad way, or more accurately, as Valeria said, when you interpret it as bad, it has all these a huge cascade of effects that will limit your cognitive flexibility and make it more likely for you to then interpret the world as bad. And so I would just say that the unknown of the unknown is pure potential. It's neither good nor bad. It's just unknown. And so if you have fear of the unknown, then I think that would be a sign of reciprocal narrowing, where you start to expect things that are unknown to be bad.
Mm-hmm.
I also want you to take it easy a little bit on the part of us that fear the unknown, because what we know has some affordances, and we don't want to lose those affordances. Now, of course, things change, and if there's a trade-off. We were talking about trade-offs when we were talking about opponent processing, and exploiting and exploring is one of the trade-offs that John talks about. We don't want to if we stay only with what we know, the world will change, and if we never explore, then we are going to end up the world will change and we will be in a bad situation. But I want to take it a bit easy on the part of me that feels comfortable in the known. When I feel intimidated by the unknown, it's like, yeah, it's okay. I will go exploring anyway because it's worth it. But
So how does this like fit with the I guess just to kind of like clarify, because there's a common taxonomy of like the stuff that I know, the stuff that I know I don't know, and the stuff that I'm not even aware of that I don't know, right? It's like usually people call it like the known known, the known unknown, and the unknown unknown. So like I guess that whenever we say fear of the unknown, are we talking about this third category? Or are we talking about the second one or both?
I was referring to the unknown unknown.
Okay, gotcha. So and that, okay, so then that kind of relates, I think, to anxiety, because like, right, anxiety can be a general sense of like, I don't know exactly what I'm worried about going wrong. I just feel like something might go wrong, right? That like, you know, whatever, if I'm going to like a party and I have like social anxiety, it's like, well, it's not like something specific. I'm like, oh man, I know so-and-so's going to be there, and like we have whatever, some social conflict, so that's going to be a problem. That's not what the thing is. It's like, I don't even know who's going to be there, what's going to happen, what could happen, and because I don't know this, there's like something that can kind of induce a state of like maybe fear or panic. And yeah, it's interesting because
I think that's still the known unknowns.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, interesting. How so? Because I know that I'm going to a party, but I also don't know what's going to happen at the party, kind of thing.
Yeah. Like the unknown unknowns are the ones that you are not considering, that, you know, positively or negatively, right? In a way, I think it's kind of a category that self-contradicts in that sense, because we say there are unknown unknowns. It's like, are there?
That's what I was
Well,
going.
yeah.
That was what I was going to ask. Like, if you really nail down on the learned ignorance, if you really learn like the learned ignorance, then you don't have any unknown unknowns, because you know that there's a bit of unknown. So.
Well, and I think maybe that relates to Peter's point about like you can't, strictly speaking, actually fear this unknown unknown, because it's not even like in the class of things I'm aware of that I could be afraid of. Whereas like the party thing is in the class of like, I know that there's a party thing happening. I also know there's something, you know, the events and the people who show up is unknown to me, but like I have some like frame of reference to like be aware of it. And that frame of reference to be aware of it is putting it into the known unknown category, which that I think makes sense to say like I could have anxiety or fear from that. But I think I agree with y'all where it's like it makes less sense to me to think about the unknown unknown, because like it's not even in my periphery. Like it's not even, right. I can't be aware of it. And it's like this kind of nebulous space of things I don't know if it's ever exhausted. Like I can't ever know that box is empty necessarily.
If you are unaware that part of the problem is how you formulate it, all the possibilities that you are excluding with your formulation are the unknown unknowns.
Wait, say that again?
So I'm proposing or asking, when you formulate a problem and you think that is the only formulation possible, all the other possibilities that you are excluding, those are unknown unknowns. That's a question.
I think like if we take it back to a concrete example, it's like when you look at the 9-dot problem, the limitation that every line has to end at a dot is like the fact that you could not do that is an unknown unknown, because this is not a constraint that you considered and understood like, okay, I must do this, but rather you somehow presupposed it without realizing, right? In that sense, Douglas Adams had a great way of expressing it, that like the deepest, the things that most deeply kind of shock you or kind of put you out of your normal state of mind is not like the breaking of assumptions that you held very strongly to be true, but the breaking of assumptions you never realized you have. He gave the example of traveling somewhere else in the world and seeing water going down the drain in the opposite direction. And he's like, you never assumed, you never looked at that and thought, oh, this has angular momentum of this way, and then it could be another way. You just never realized that that's an assumption. That's why it's like, this is looking so weird.
so I feel compelled to want to give like more concrete, less abstract, like less like technical space problems of like, okay, I use this one a lot. It's kind of funny because I actually don't drive. So this isn't personally relatable, but I think a lot of people find this relatable. You're in traffic, a guy cuts you off and you're pissed. You're like, that guy's an asshole, right? That guy's like stressing me out, almost caused me to rear end him and have a wreck and like whatever, stop me from going to work or getting to where I'm going. So that's one problem formulation, right? One problem formulation is that my problem is there is this asshole in front of me who's like cutting me off and who just put me in immediate danger. But another formulation, which maybe is in their unknown category, would be like, well, look, I notice that I'm having an emotional response to this kind of stimulus, right? And I wonder if there's some way I can kind of mediate that response or engage with that response, right, in a way that you know is makes my experience less stressful and less like painful to go through. And that's something I think, right, that can come from practice like mindfulness, where it's like you can kind of become aware of that kind of response. And that's like I think a set of practices and tools that can help us, you know, kind of reformulate problems. But like, but when I run into people who have never like, who don't like haven't practiced meditation or like haven't maybe like have done it on their own and kind of, you know, had a bad experience with it, and so it's like, oh, that's just not for me because, you know, I did this one time and it didn't work out. Or like, I remember I met someone who was like, well, you know, my mind just kept wandering. I was like, oh, this is like a futile, like, you know, an exercise in futility. And I was like, well, it's actually, that's part of the, that's part of the process, becoming aware that your mind does this thing, and then being, you know, and then practicing how to bring it back to the point of focus. At least that's one version of meditation. And so it's curious to me because I don't know how we like, so that's like, so I guess I'm giving an example of like a way to reformulate a problem that's hopefully more concrete to people's experience. Or even like one, so I'm remembering a story now of like someone I know who you know, their kind of like disposition conversationally I found very like irritating, and it was kind of in this approach to like, well, I always need to have some type of justification for like why I'm doing this thing right now. And if I don't, then like I'm going to basically just check out and not like really engage in this environment, the social whatever it is. And for a long, like, you know, for a long time, I was like, man, this is like so frustrating to be around. Like, why can't this person just kind of free play and just like see where it goes, and it might be, you know, constructive. But then I realized like, oh wait, if I reformulate this as like, well, you know, because then I took the perspective like, well, what might cause someone to have this kind of perspective? Like, I actually took a step back and I was like, you know, I started to think about, well, you know, what if, you know, because I started to relate like, okay, what if I spent most of my life not doing stuff that was productive, right? Like the majority of my life felt like I wasted it. Then that could definitely put me in a situation where I'd feel like compelled to like always need a reason for this next situation. Like, so like, you know, if I like slacked off and I feel like I wasted most of my life, then I would feel this kind of like, you know, pressure, this anxiety to want to like have everything I'm doing to have a reason, to have a justification, that's something meaningful or something like in alignment with my values and goals. And so like once I had that reformulation, I was like, oh man, I'm so less bothered by this person. Like, I'm totally cool. It's not an issue. It's just like just the reframing of the thing actually made the problem just go away, because I was no longer like actually bothered by like, you know, what can I do to like, you know, somehow change this person. It's like, oh, actually maybe it doesn't need to change. Maybe I just can understand them better, to where that puts me in a position where I can more easily I guess be less emotionally frustrated and be more empathetic to that kind of that personality. So I don't know if that helped, but I'll just stop there.
I like this conversations because that they keep highlighting over and over again the importance of things like cognitive flexibility, capacity to direct your attention, capacity to disengage from things that grab your attention, or capacity from disengage from salience and looking past salience. And that highlights all the ways in which the psychotechnologies like mindfulness and all the other things that we practice, how they help us become wiser and have the aha moments and having the capacities when we need them.
There's one more thing in that context that I think about, and specifically in the more personal and interpersonal context related to problem formulation, is I think there's a real danger when you start identifying with a certain formulation of your problems. And that's, for instance, if we go to Kevin's example, someone cuts you off on the road and you get upset. And a lot of times people would say, well, of course I'm getting upset. I'm justified in getting upset, you know, and this is me, or, you know, like this is me as a catch-all, right? And I've spoken to some people who had this kind of, you know, strong connection to exactly the mindsets that were, by their own admission, causing them so much pain, right? So on one hand, you're saying, you know, the world is so terrible that it's causing me so much pain, but like without any willingness, say like, you could be different and then the world wouldn't cause you so much pain. No. I identify with the way I formulated the problem, and thus like I can't be flexible about it. I can't reformulate.
And politics.
Yeah,
When
politics,
groups
for
get
sure.
into like, let's fight for this solution without, is there a way in which we can all see the problem? We agree on the problem, and we agree on the constraints, and maybe we could find a solution that works for all of us.
I think you're absolutely right in the sense that in politics right now, the issue is that we don't agree on the problem. It's not about finding solutions. It's about that, like, both sides are just saying like, no, this is the problem, and this guy saying, no, this is the problem, and then like each side is very much trapped and not looking to reformulate for all of the, let's say, dynamical processes that kind of push it in that direction.
Wow. Yeah, that's deeply insightful. I mean, one of the things I was trying to make sense is why there's so much contention in politics. I remember I was trying to explain to one of my friends that you could have a differing political opinion than them, and then you could state a proposition and they don't care about the proposition, you know? And so the fact that you could put forth all these facts and it's not persuasive to them tells me that it's not really the propositions that change people's mind. And I love Vervaeke's concept of perspectival knowing, because I think what's occurring in this the divisive realm of politics is there's different perspectival knowings, and so these propositions are not actually relevant to their perspective. And so that's why, I mean, I'll be blunt, but that's why I don't think facts and logic just change people's minds or are effective ways of persuading people over to your side. And I really want to talk about logic and problem formulation, because for my whole life, I thought you could just use logic. If you just figured out all the logical fallacies and all the cognitive biases, then you were set, you know? That was the gold standard for living life and for thinking and rationality. And then Vervaeke comes out and says, no, you can't just Mr. Spock your way through life because of the combinatorial explosive nature of reality. And so you have to rely on heuristics. And so that's something I want to explore and talk about, is the limitation of logic and how we can't just logic our way through problems, and how the process of insight is not necessarily a analytical one, and how that's central to rationality.
So there's something about the which I'm glad you mentioned the political thing, because actually it reminds me of a party I was at some years ago, and I remember like finding myself in a group conversation, and it became a heated, you know, political debate basically between two different parties, or two different individuals at the time. And I'll just call them like A and B, because like that's easier. I'm not sure I can remember the names, but the what was interesting is that I guess part of this whole perspectival thing, right, was like they didn't, you know, and it was funny because they actually didn't necessarily disagree about like, because okay, so for context, I'm in Texas, and there's typically political contention about border, you know, policy and things like that, right? And And so people who let's say are more conservative or like lean towards like the Republican Party in Texas, right, are kind of more concerned about immigration policy. And in this context, let's call him A. A's concern was the like the presence and the risk of drug cartels and like any violence that might kind of occur as a consequence of them being able to pass easily through the border, right? And the context of B, it's funny because B, who I would say is like maybe more left-leaning or more progressive or more closely aligned with the Democratic policies in Texas, they didn't disagree that like they both agreed that we don't want drug cartel violence, right, in the state of Texas. Like that was like a clear like agreement. What was different about what they were like seemed to be disputing, this is like something I'm trying to mediate in their disagreement, was like they just had a different like assessment about what the risk level was of this being a problem, right? And so for B, what their thing was is that yes, I agree that's like something that we don't want, but I disagree. B was saying about like the likelihood of that happening, right? Or like how much of a problem is that really? And what is the trade-off of like how much money am I going to allocate to this kind of project and this kind of procedure and resources versus like stuff like education or homelessness and other things like that, right? So it's funny because it wasn't even like they had a different like set of things that were relevant. It was like they just had different assessment about like what priority we should be giving these different problems. And so that was interesting to me because it was like and it's funny because like I don't like they had a disagreement, and eventually when they parted ways, I was able to talk to them. I was like, hey, so, and it seemed like they had a very different like they had a very like kind of a like what do you call it, like stereotypical view of what the other person must be thinking. I was like, well, I don't think B was saying this. I think they're saying this, right? And then I'll go to A and like I don't think or I'll go to B and say I don't think A was saying this. I think they're actually like focusing on this. And it seems like y'all do agree about this thing about we don't want the violence and we don't want drug cartels to be a thing. But it seems to be disagreeing about like how serious a problem is that, and like what should take priority over our taxpayer dollars to like go to in terms of funding. So yeah, I guess I'll tag out there.
I think Kara wanted to say something a while ago.
It's okay. I wanted to invite people. I wanted to thank Peter for bringing in logic and Mr. Spock and Mr. Data kind of way of being, and why they are not captains actually as well.
Oh.
So in logic in itself is not enough. It's a good addition to the team, but it's not enough to be a good leader. Like thinking outside of the outside of the box. Let's say let's talk. For example, if Spock then Kirk. So Kirk definitely was the guy who would think outside of the box, and he's definitely like he can see many possibilities as well, and he consults Spock on the things he misses out.
I love that.
And so that's how the ship can fly and explore to boldly go where no one has gone before, right? You need all of those. You also need McCoy there and Scotty and
someone needs to beam you up.
you are our Scotty.
I love that. It's great to have Spock on the team, but he cannot be the captain.
Yeah,
Yes.
I love that too. That's awesome. I didn't pick up on that. That's great. Yeah, he's not the captain. Exactly. I wonder if they even talk about that in the show, because I remember he tried to be the captain once and like someone else became the captain. I forgot his name. Captain Kurt or something like that.
As someone who has not watched Star Trek, I appreciate this reference because I know, right? Like I know who Spock is. I know that Kirk was the captain, but that's all I know. But I appreciate this kind of analogy here.
I haven't watched it either.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I haven't either. I don't even know the
Oh my
captain's
God,
name.
millennials!
How come the women have watched the Star Trek and the guys have not? That's a weird group.
Oh, no. Oh my God.
I'm just really amused about the fact that actually there's a majority who haven't watched it, but all of us felt because of the room
Yeah, like,
that like we must be the only one because everyone is taking it, for granted, and then it turns out like majority of us have not watched it. It's funny.
I wanted to bring in the evil Spock as well from the other universe with the beard, and even in the evil universe, the evil Spock still was not the captain. He was also, even in the evil universe, he was still number 2. I mean, he was the first officer, but like he was number 2 in command.
we could bring in Ian McGilchrist with the left brain and the right brain, and the left brain is a good emissary, but not a good master.
Mm.
There's something just about what you were saying before, Peter, regarding like how can you the fact that you can't just like Mr. Spock your way, and the fact that you can't figure out all the biases and stuff and become set for life. The thing that's interesting for me is, though that's true, you can still be worse at it, than or better at it, right? Like it's being like fundamentally self-deceptive, and John kind of even mentions it in problem formulation, which I thought was interesting. Which in the clip we saw, he was saying, bad problem formulation doesn't show you how salience is leading you astray. And specifically, I think like there are still elements that you can point to in order to improve that, right? It's not so clear cut, and wisdom is really hard to do. It's a thing that you can't, there's no shortcuts, there's no manual, there's no algorithm. Yeah, but it doesn't, I don't really like it when like sometimes through this kind of ignorance, we fall into a kind of, let's say, low level or nihilistic ignorance, which is kind of like, we don't know. So like, now we can't say that anything is better than anything else. But I
Right.
think, yeah,
We want Spock on the team.
that's right. In his
We
right
love it.
place, not captain, but like first officer or whatever his role is. I didn't watch Star Trek.
Oh
The
my
thing
God.
that Spock does.
Yeah, it still serves a very useful purpose.
The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Oh yeah.
And you guys will never know the pain that associated with that line after so many years. My heart.
Yeah, I mean, he never died though, did he?
Yeah, with that
Don't
line.
spoil it.
Spoiler!
Yeah, no spoilers,
Oh.
man. Like because I'm actually kind of motivated to watch it because like, oh, I guess there's a lot of stuff there I'm missing. But
It was 50 years ago. It was
I still
68,
haven't watched
69.
it. Don't judge me.
Oh my God, I watched all of them. And then I watched even New Pike.
So problem formulation.
Yes, back to
Right.
problem
Yeah.
formulation. You guys touched on wisdom, and I really like, in a sense of problem formulation, what is missing. So I will not use the same vocabulary that John used for different types of wisdom, but basically the gist of it. For wisdom, it's not enough to know all the information and all the book and have this all encyclopedic knowledge of everything. Even if you know every virtue, like you just know everything basically. Wisdom is when you know, for example, which virtue to apply at each moment, because it's not, you cannot be only telling the truth all the time. Otherwise you will say something wrong and you will offend people. It's a combination of things. It's a combination. Sometimes you have to be kind. Sometimes you have to be truthful. It's a balance. And wisdom is your ability to apply that. And so in problem formulation, I think it's connected as well to that ability to find what is the right thing to do. And it's very much connected to the situational awareness, your ability to assess the situation properly.
I'm curious to think in this context, where do we stop using problem formulation? Like at what point? Because I'm thinking, right, we're talking a lot about assessing a situation. How do we formulate the problem? When I think about, you know, a loved one is suffering or, you know, not feeling well or something, and you want to be there with them. Right? I think like that to me sort of goes outside the realm of where I would be comfortable speaking about problem formulation, right? I think that's kind of pushing the term.
What do you mean, Galad?
What I mean is we can use a lot of terms like everywhere, and they would technically be correct, but I don't know, they don't ring true. They don't feel like they're useful. They don't feel like they give insight to what attention should be paid to, like, or how to refrain or things like that. And to me, like, there's, if I look at trying to be present with a loved one when they're in pain, that doesn't ring like something that I should consider within the frame of problem formulation, right?
Well, I'd like to push back on that, because I feel like that's just a meta problem formulation. Because being present with your loved one, I mean, like, you hear this all the time in relationships where someone will bring up their problems and they don't really want solution to the problems. They just want to be listened to, you know? That in of itself, I think, is a part of problem formulation, which is you're not actually, the problem to be solved is not what you think it is. The problem to be solved is to be empathetic. It's just to listen, show your sympathy, and that's it. You know, that's the solution. And I think problem formulation still captures that, which is the thing that's relevant here isn't trying to analyze and formalize and mechanize and break it all down. It's an emotional connection. And I would still argue that fits the paradigm of problem formulation. It's just a different frame.
So would you say that, like, I'm trying to figure out whether we disagree that problem formulation shouldn't be all encompassing, or we just disagree where it should stop, right? You know, maybe because maybe the example is where you disagree, but you do think like it shouldn't encapsulate everything, or maybe you agree that it shouldn't encapsulate everything, but you're saying this should still be within the things encapsulated in it. So did I make the distinction clear?
I don't know. I didn't quite follow that. I mean, all I'm saying is that you have to use problem formulation for every problem that you come across, for every ill-defined problem. There's no way out of it. So I would say it is all encompassing. I think it's something that we do even if we're not aware that we're doing it either. And we don't necessarily even have to be aware of this particular theory of problem formulation to engage with it as well. And so what you're saying is that if we have to understand this theory in this particular way and try to make ill-defined problems well-defined problems according to this way of doing it, then I would just respond with that. That's the theory already includes that there is no one way of doing that. And there's no way to know for any given context or for all contexts what that way is, only for a given context.
The way being like the process of moving ill-defined into well-defined problems.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The framing is helpful, or this way of seeing the world is helpful when you think of something as a problem.
Mm.
In the case of being with the loved one, you are not seeing it as a problem to be solved. Like when you have a problem to be solved, especially when you're stuck, but when it's a difficult problem, then the framing is helpful. If you don't see something as a problem to be solved, then the framing might not be helpful.
I mean, I don't, in a way, I kind of agree with you, Peter. I don't know where I'm disagreeing or where we differ. It just feels like there should be a place, and it's similar to what you were saying, Valerio. So
I think Valeria touched on it really well. It's even coming in with the mindset that there is a problem to be solved could in of itself be a problem.
Yes, and I haven't mentioned my husband yet, so that's when I mentioned him. That's one of his insights that we had this insight of how our conversations were sometimes breaking. It's like he says, "No, I'm seeing it as a problem. There is no problem to be solving here, right? You just want to tell me something about you."
Right.
And I get what you're saying about like the meta problem formulation, but that kind of goes all the way in like in an infinite regress, and at some point like you get into all of the paradoxes that come with that. So I don't know, like there is a point in my sense of it that I feel like I kind of want to draw a border somewhere, and I don't think there's any neat border, but it has to happen somewhere because it can't go on forever.
Right.
Well,
I'd agree with that.
So, but this idea, like, which I think Larry pointed on, is like, well, the problem formulation, let's say framework, what we're trying to talk about in this conversation, is only helpful whenever you have something that you want to frame as a problem. But this kind of reminds me of like, you can still use it, like, because I'm thinking about the actual episode, which I think is like what 27 maybe, about that's like I think named problem formulation in the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series, where like he has like this little diagram of like the initial state and the goal state. He has a bunch of nodes and arrows, and it's supposed to represent all the different ways you might be able to get to the goal state. But I was thinking about like what I was mentioning earlier about like the person cutting off in traffic, or like the thing I was mentioning, right? Like having like a like a interpersonal kind of dispute, and like wanting that person to change their behavior, right, or like change how they interact. That like that's like my goal state, right? Is like I want the driver to like not be an asshole, or I want the person to like engage in this behavior because I find that preferable. But then if I like sometimes like if I step back, I might say, oh, actually that goal state, that's actually that might shift, right? And it might shift to be very, very close to my initial state. And in that situation, there is no problem to be solved. It's actually been dissolved because I've shifted what my goal state is. And so I guess like I'm kind of asking a question, like how do we think of that process of like, yeah.
Can I try to, I think I have what you're saying, but let me try to phrase it and tell me if that's the thing. Because I think what you're describing is in Peter's terms, right? There's problem formulation when you're encountering some goal state, and there's meta problem formulation, which is like now you've stepped back and you're saying like maybe that's not a problem, maybe I should optimize for something else, but that question is a kind of ill-defined problem, like, or how to be present with a loved one or something. That's kind of meta problem formulation, and then you can still use that framework to talk about it, because like, oh, dissolving, like there's an implicit thing that you're saying, oh, dissolving the problem was good, now there's no problem. In what context? Like you have to have a frame that you formulate a problem, and having those sub problems dissolved was a good thing on the path to something. So that's why I meant like there's a sort of infinite regress about it.
You're right. Something I want to point out here is I think there's a difference between problem in this context isn't something that's necessarily bad. It's just something that has an initial state and a goal state and a way of trying to get there. And that's it. So it's not something like, oh man, this thing is bad. And because it's bad, I need to formulate a way that's meta to eliminate the problem. You know, I think it's just, it's a way of starting and ending.
I think
I'm
it's
super
also-
lost. Yeah, so go ahead, Blair.
It's also helpful to understand what we're doing here. Like when we can use the little bits of Vervaeke terms and ideas and frames and directly apply them to our lives. And that's great when we can do that. There is also the thing that he has this very interesting framework for understanding how our minds and how our cognition works.
Mhm.
And I think there is value in understanding how my mind works, because I'm seeing the world through my mind, so it's good for me to understand how the thing works. But it does not, it's like theoretical physics and applied physics, or theoretical science and applied science. There's both aspects to John's work, and confusing both and thinking that everything that he says needs to be directly applicable all the time immediately. I think it's a little bit of a fallacy there, in my view.
I would agree with that. There's a difference between the language of training and the language of explaining. And what theories we talk about here are always going to be in the context of the language of explaining. And so knowing how your mind works, for example, is very different from actually knowing how to use your mind.
Let's everybody meditate.
I'll try one last time to formulate my problem with problem formulation at the moment. And I guess my difficulty is that I don't know when you would, I think it might be reasonable to say that problem formulation is when you're still solving the same problem. But if you're, looking at another problem that's, maybe at a meta level or something, like, then we can focus that with the term, like it's the same problem, but I formulated it differently and now I can reach the goal state better. But then I don't know how to differentiate when like a reformulation is still solving the same problem or not. Like that becomes hard to pinpoint, right?
I need you to use an example, man. I cannot follow
Yeah,
that.
that's mysterious.
I can try to give one. So, like I actually keep thinking about reformulation, and I want to connect it to what Peter was saying earlier and Valeria was saying earlier about talking to the loved ones and consoling them when they're telling you their problem. So I will apply a thing I learned from nonviolent communication. It's when somebody shares a problem with you, and let's say they are not asking for solution. If it's the loved one, they try to unload, let's say, right? And yet there is a thing that Marshall Rosenberg suggested in his book, repeat their problem to them, paraphrase it, and with the intention of being understood. So somebody shares the problem, you paraphrase them, you repeat them to them. It's like, am I understanding you correctly? Could you, did I get it right? Could you elaborate on this? And the more you do, and he reported that it has very positive effects on the people who just wanted to unload, let's say, unburden themselves. Somehow the solution, it's not, you are not necessarily given an advice. A solution already appears after even hearing differently framed problem or proposition. They were like the subject. So that's the example I was thinking about the reframing specifically. Does it make sense?
Yeah,
I
that's
would
great.
I would complement to that what the problem that the person is trying to solve, it's not the problem that I have. I'm talking to them because I want their help to understand even what my problem is. I'm engaging them not for a solution, but for the problem formulation. And then they assume that they know what the problem is and start giving me solutions that don't address my problem.
That's very good, Valeria. That's what I was thinking about.
So I still need help understanding like what, because Glad, like I'm really actually like super lost. I'm gonna try to do what they said. So like
I can try. I have a good example though.
Okay, good. Go for it. Yeah.
All right. Let's say you're playing chess with someone and you want to beat them, right? And you have an insight that if you make them laugh at something, they become less focused and then you can win, right? Have you solved the problem of beating them at chess? And that really depends, right? What was the problem you were trying to solve? Like if it was just beating them specifically, maybe, but if you were trying to beat them at their best game, then you've just kind of shifted the problem. So, and like in a way, it becomes vague when you go there. That's all I'm trying to say. That you can make problems easier, but you could also do it by not solving them actually, or I don't know.
Okay, and that's exactly okay. And that's what you were saying earlier with the example of like the like what was it, the Cooper pair stuff, or where it's like that was such an example where like they didn't actually solve the problem of all these crazy equations. They said no, screw that. Let's do a simpler thing, which is like close enough that like this is like good enough for our purposes. Like it may not exactly solve that exact problem, but I shift it just differently. It's a different problem, really, technically, but it's close enough for like my purposes, right?
Yeah, I mean, in a way that's simple because like the problem was well defined. Like we wanted to get a model for superconductivity. Like if your goal was to like, I want something that wins at chess and it gives you a solution, I don't want to play chess anymore, then you know that it hasn't solved the problem, right? But sometimes like when the problem is ill-defined to begin with, then I'm saying like those become hard to understand and talk about through this whole framework. And I don't know what more to say except that it's hard and I don't get it.
Right. I want to clarify that I wasn't trying to allude to the idea of a meta problem formulation. And I agree that that creates an infinite regress. You know, it's kind of like asking what's the purpose of purpose. I wanted to focus more on just the process of problem formulation and still try to frame the theory within things that we wouldn't even regard as problems. As I said before, I still think coming to the realization that something is not a problem is in of itself a problem. And so but you don't have to understand the theory to come to that realization. It's like people that are really good at playing billiards don't need to know all of the complex mathematical algorithms and use those to calculate how exactly what they're going to do and what kind of effect that's going to have. They play as if they already know that and they're following that. But if you ask them, you know, to break it down, they won't be able to do it for you. And I think insight and wisdom is the same way, is they don't have to tell you all the technical cognitive processes that occur within their mind. They have the insight and they have the way that gets them from where they want to be to where, or from where they are to where they want to be.
Yeah, and I agree we can't do without it. I mean, that's really technically clear. I don't know. I'm in a pleasant state of aporia, so I think I can just stop that there.
And it's also good because I think we are past the time already.
So guys, I would like to invite you to sort of check out basically a couple of sentences, what was new to you in that live stream, what is mysterious, whatever comes to your mind, just a short summary. And I would like to start with Kevin.
Well, let's see. I guess something that's mysterious because it's like, I guess it's a recency bias happening, is I think what Gilad just pointed out, if I understood it right, of like, well, how would I tell, like in the process of trying to like, solve a problem, it's like, how do I tell if it makes more sense to like look for a certain path to the goal state, or like if I need to shift the goal state, right? Like to something different from what it was. That's actually like kind of unclear to me as to, what are the heuristics or what are the rules of thumb I might use to do that. So that's something that I think that's mysterious to me. And in summarization, I'm just not going to attempt to do it. So that'll be all for me. Thank you.
Gilad?
I had a lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, it feels like it's something that on the surface of it, like I watched and I kind of listened to what John was saying and trying to understand, and everything fit into place. And then, discussing it here, it went from, yeah, it seems like my understanding is cohering with everyone, to, man, I don't really understand this as much as I thought, right? Even to cohere with myself. So that's always fun.
Peter?
I just have to say that the main takeaway that I got out of this conversation is that logic, in addition to insight, mindfulness, is what's central to problem solving and problem formulation and rationality. And that logic is not necessarily this thing that's bad either. Like I said before, I used to think it was the thing that would save us all, but then I did a complete 180 and thought, I was completely deluded, and so this thing's completely awful. But after hearing what you said about Mr. Spock, I realized it's neither. And so yeah, that's mostly what I got out of it.
And Valeria?
I like cognitive science. I like to think of us as beings that have intelligence and can use that intelligence to affect our environments according to our goals. I like to think in those terms, and I like to feel into my own desires and my own, take the first person perspective of things, and how does it feel for me to want to affect my environment in a particular way, and what are the ways in which I am limiting myself, or I am stuck in a particular view on things that I think that that's something that I want, and it's what I wanted is something different. So I think the most important thing in this whole conversation is the fact that we are always missing a lot of possibilities, and it has to be like that because the number of possibilities is infinite. Even the possibilities that are real possibilities is a lot more than I can fit in my head. So knowing that there is always a lot more to any situation than I can possibly be aware of, and being aware of my ignorance, being a little bit more humble, being a little bit more humble, hopefully being a little bit wiser. That's, I think, what is the most present for me.
I learned that problem formulation is very much connected with decision making and relevance realization. And we need more perspectives in order to formulate better. And I wanted to leave you guys with a short poem, a quote by Robert Frost. We dance around and suppose, but the secret sits inside and knows. Next week on Friday, the poetry will be missing. I can't be there physically on the internet. So, but the live stream on Saturday pretty much happening. And please in the comments write what subject is interesting to you and you would like to discuss in the future episodes. Like, I'm pretty much thinking discussing just psychotechnologies, like all the different ones. That's my personal preference. Guys, I will provide the link below. How do you join the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord server? I will also provide the link to the clip we played today. I'm grateful to everybody in the comments, all the viewers, and also the viewers who will watch after. And I'm really grateful to my panel today. Guys, you were wonderful. Thank you so much. Stay for the after